So, boys and girls, you are very welcome to our lesson number 22. But before we look at lesson 22, I want to remind you that in our previous lesson with Teacher Mbala, we looked at so many pertinent issues. We looked at methods of colonial administration in Africa. And he told you that there were basically three methods of colonial administration in Africa, where you talked about direct rule, you talked about indirect rule, and then assimilation policy. However, he went further to give the meaning of those systems of administration. He told you that indirect rule was the system of administration where colonial masters used African chiefs and kings to rule on their behalf. He further told you that indirect rule was used by the British colonial masters in East Africa and other parts of Africa. And he also told you that there were very various reasons why the British chose to use indirect system of administration. Similarly, you looked at direct rule, and he told you that direct rule was the system of administration where colonial masters ruled by themselves. And he told you that the German colonial masters in Tanganyika mainly used direct rule. And he gave you reasons why the Germans chose or decided to use direct system of administration. You further looked at the effects of colonial systems of administration or implications of colonial administrative systems in Africa. But then today, we want to look at the very sad system of administration. That is none other than assimilation policy. That's none other than assimilation policy. Now look at the word assimilation. You must be able to write it very well and very correctly. But then before we look at assimilation in depth, I want to set targets for you. Boys and girls, by the end of this lesson, you should be able, one, to give the meaning of assimilation policy. Number two, to make mention of a group of colonial masters that implemented or that used assimilation policy. And then where in Africa was assimilation policy practiced. Number three, you should be in position to mention different ways in which assimilation policy was implemented or practiced in West African spheres of influence or territories. Finally, you should be able to give reasons why assimilation policy was applied. And then you should also be able to give the negative consequences of assimilation policy in West Africa. Now, we want to start looking at assimilation policy in depth. Our first question is, what was assimilation policy? But before we look at this, I want to put you that the word assimilation comes from the word assimilate. That means to make somebody behave like. So what was assimilation policy? Assimilation policy, boys and girls, was the total transformation of Africans by culture into French way of life. The total transformation of Africans by culture into French way of life. There are very various ways we can give the meaning of assimilation policy besides this one. We can also say that assimilation policy was a policy, assimilation was a policy that involved changing Africans to behave like the French. Assimilation was a policy that involved changing Africans to behave like the French. Another person can say that assimilation policy was a colonial system of administration that involved making Africans adapt to French lifestyle. I want to repeat that. Someone can say that assimilation was a colonial system of administration that involved making Africans adapt to French lifestyle. So those three definitions are very correct. You can take one. Now, we want to look at how assimilation policy was practiced in West Africa. But then I want to report to you that it is the French colonial masters in West Africa that implemented or that used assimilation system of administration. How were the French able to assimilate Africans into their lifestyle? How were they able to implement, how were they able to practice assimilation policy in West Africa? How were they able to make Africans in West Africa to behave like them? How were they able to force them to adopt their lifestyle? One, Africans were forced to speak French. Yes, of course, Africans were speaking their native languages before the coming of French colonial masters to West Africa. But then when these French came, they forced Africans to speak French language. And even today, as we speak, French is the national language and actually official language for some West African territories or countries. How else was assimilation policy practiced or implemented? Two, Africans were forced to take up French religion. Remember, you should recall that before the coming of French colonial masters to West Africa, Africans believed in African traditional religion. African traditional religion was the very first religion in Africa, even before the coming of foreigners. But then, when the French came, they forced Africans to take up foreign languages, French religion. We Africans over there were forced to worship in the French system or in a French style. Sadly, boys and girls, Africans were allowed to travel to France. This was also a way of assimilating Africans, making them behave like the French. They were given opportunity, they were given chance to travel to France and even become French citizens. And today, as we speak, we have so many Africans in France who are citizens over there. The other way, boys and girls, we can talk about Africans are forced to adapt the French dress code. Even the mere dress code, the French imparted it into African people in West Africa. They forced them to dress like them. So Africans are forced to adapt French dress code. Another one, boys and girls, Africans were encouraged to become French citizens. In Genesis, I told you that today as we speak, that we have so many Africans, especially in West Africa, who have gone to France and they have become citizens there. A citizen, boys and girls, is a person with full rights to be, a person who enjoys full civil and democratic rights in a particular country. Or a person with a right to belong to a particular country. A person with a right to belong to a particular country. That's a citizen. Now, Africans were encouraged to become French citizens. What else, boys and girls? French was the language of instruction in schools. Just like we use English as a language of instruction in our schools, even in West Africa, the French actually implemented assimilation policy by making French language instructions in school. An instrument of instruction in schools. So French was the language of instruction in schools. Another one, boys and girls, Africans adopted French feeding style. Even feeding style. Africans were forced to adopt the French feeding style. Another one, boys and girls, we want to look at why the French used assimilation policy. Why did the French choose to use assimilation policy in West Africa? Why didn't they use direct rule just like the Germans, or even indirect rule just like the British? But they chose to use assimilation policy. One, they wanted to promote French nationalism. When you talk about nationalism, this simply means one is love for his or her country, or one is devotion to develop his or her country economically, socially, and politically. So the French wanted to promote French nationalism. That's why they decided to use what you call assimilation policy. Number two, boys and girls, they wanted to promote French culture. Of course, you all know that culture refers to norms and values of a given society. Now, for the case of the French, they wanted to promote French culture. The other one, boys and girls, is the desire to spread French cherished values. They wanted actually to promote desire. They wanted, to promote the desire to spread French cherished values in West African territories. Boys and girls, we also want to look at how assimilation policy affected the people of Africa, especially West Africa. How did assimilation, the total transformation of Africans by culture into French way of life, how did that system affect the people of West Africa? I want to report to you that the system of administration brought so many remarkable, outstanding effects upon African communities, of which effects were both positive and negative. But in this case, we want to briefly look at how assimilation policy negatively affected the people of West Africa. One, it undermined African culture. It undermined African culture. You know, when the French colonial masters came to Africa, they forced Africans to adopt their culture, to behave like them. This undermined our initial culture, that's African culture. We lost it, therefore, because of the introduction of French culture as a result of assimilation policy. Number two, boys and girls, Africans were deprived of their identity. Now, when you start behaving like someone, you lose your original identity. So when Africans started behaving like the French, they surely lost their African identity. So they were deprived of African identity. This is negative they looked at. Another one, boys and girls, it brought hatred between Africans and the French. You know, Africans were allowed to travel to France and even become French citizens. So the French in France, actually, who saw Africans taking control of the economy, actually developed hatred. They hated African people because they thought Africans were taking over their economy. So the gates of hatred between Africans and the French were widened. So it brought hatred between Africans and the French. The other one, boys and girls, it led to loss of lives among Africans. You know, when the French were trying to implement assimilation policy, so many Africans resisted. They were not willing to adopt the French lifestyle. So those ones who tried to resist the French system of assimilation, they were killed. Most of them were killed. Some of them were imprisoned, exiled, intimidated, to mention but a few. So assimilation policy led to loss of lives among Africans, especially those who are not willing to adapt to French lifestyle, who were totally against assimilation policy in West Africa. Like we had the people of Senegal under Leopold Senghor, who actually organized the people of Senegal to fight against assimilation policy. Many people died in the process. Now, we also want to say it led to exploitation of Africa's resources. Now, when the French established their system of administration in the name of assimilation, they were able to manipulate all our resources because they were able to take control over all our national resources. Therefore, they had access of exploiting them. They highly exploited our resources. Talk about land, talk about minerals. They tapped so many valuable minerals from productive areas of Africa, and they took them to France. Boys and girls, assimilation policy also led to loss of African respect and dignity. You know, when you start actually behaving or living someone else's lifestyle, you surely lose respect and dignity. So when Africans adopted the French system, the French lifestyle, they lost their African respect and dignity. Just like some of us, instead of living our own lifestyle, we want to live someone else's lifestyle. That one deprives you. It undermines your own dignity and respect. Boys and girls, assimilation policy also led to the destruction of African social, economic, and political systems. You know, before the coming of French colonial masters to West Africa, Africans had their own well-established social, economic, and political systems. Like we were organized in kingdoms under kings, in chiefdoms under chiefs, in clans under clan heads, to mention but a few. But when the French came, they actually forced us to change. They led to destruction of our socio-economic and political systems. Last but not least, boys and girls, it was also expensive for the French to implement. Much as the French had a burning desire to implement or to introduce or to assimilate Africans into their lifestyle, but it was very expensive for them. For example, they had to fund assimilation systems in schools and many other public places. So assimilation policy was quite expensive for the French colonial masters to implement in all over their spheres of influence. Boys and girls, assimilation policy also led to imprisonment, to torture, mistreatment of some Africans. In Genesis, I told you that assimilation policy led to death, imprisonment, torture, and mistreatment of some Africans, especially those who are not willing to adapt French lifestyle. Those ones who were rigid to change, who were adamant to change from their African lifestyle to a French way or to a French lifestyle. So those ones who were imprisoned, they were tortured, they were mistreated, they were intimidated, to mention but a few. So these were all negative impacts of assimilation policy on African communities in West Africa. Boys and girls, in our next lesson, we shall also look at the positive impacts. The positive impacts or effects of assimilation policy. I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. We are going to upload this work and then you will download, come up with the best notes, and then with the activity we shall send it, then you answer. Thank you so much. We love you so much, and we are indeed proud of you, our candidates. We are very sure beyond doubt that you guys are doing the right thing. Thank you. May God bless you.